TolkCast, a Tolkien podcast, presented by the German Tolkien Society. Interview special. Welcome to another episode of TolkCast. Normally, our podcast is in German, but every so often we meet great people who we interview. These sessions remain in the English original. To get to the regular podcast episodes and to the German translation of this interview, just follow the link in the description. In this interview episode, you'll get to know the Tolkien scholars Christina Scull and Wayne G. Hammond. We spoke to them last August during the Tolkien 2019 International Conference in Birmingham. Both of them were unfortunately in poor health, but did not miss the opportunity to record the interview anyway. As always with TolkCast, you'll first hear the English original and then the German translation. You can jump directly to the German part with the chapter marks. But now, have fun with the interview. I'm sitting here completely in awe and honored with Christina Scull and Wayne G. Hammond, which not only for me mean the world because they have been the two good and white towers of Tolkien scholarship. And I'd like to ask you, Christina, where are you from?
Well, I was born in Bristol, in England. I've spent early, but as soon as I finished school, I moved to London. And a few years later, I did join the Tolkien Society. And through the Tolkien Society, I met Wayne Hammond, who, because we were both major collectors, and it so happened that eventually we married, and I moved to America, to Massachusetts, where Wayne lives, with my own container of the books. Books rather than furniture went with me.
Same
Wayne.
Question?
Yes, if you please.
All right. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. That's in the northern part of Ohio on Lake Erie, actually from the suburb called Brooklyn. I was born and raised in the area. Went to school there, went to graduate school in Michigan, and from the time I received my library degree, I moved to Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is the exact opposite end of the state from Boston, in case anyone wonders, because I work in the Chapin Library of Rare Books at Williams College, which is in Williamstown, one of the great liberal arts colleges in the United States, and the Chapin Library is one of the great rare book libraries, and since 2015 I've been the director.
Maybe the next question for you directly. What are your hobbies apart from researching and apart from collecting?
Well, doing Tolkien research and writing really doesn't leave a lot of time for hobbies, especially since I also have a full-time job, which is very demanding. What do? I cook, mainly. I like to cook. I'm the cook in the house. So I look at recipes and I try different dishes, trying to do things that are simple but elegant and very much to our tastes. And I watch movies, I listen to music, relatively passive things like that.
The next question for Christina does fit very well with what you said, because it's what's your favorite food? And maybe to indulge, what's the favorite food from what Wayne cooks?
Oh, that's difficult because he does quite a lot of good things. He always trying new recipes. If we go somewhere, he's done a sort of, when we went to one place, we got Moroccan chicken from it. And it's very difficult to say. He's generally good.
That's good. What did you like to do when you were little, when you were a child, Christina?
Reading. I read an awful lot. I was within one block of the local library, and you were allowed 3 tickets. But my parents used to let me use one of theirs, all of theirs, so I could use the adult library. I asked for J.R.R. as a Christmas present when I was about 8 or 9.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, it was that way. I'll go on, shall I, with this? In that way that I came to meet Tolkien, because I was standing in the meet Tolkien, but discover Tolkien. I was standing looking at the books being returned to the adult library when I was 13. And a young librarian came up to me with a copy of The Two Towers, as it happened, in her hand, and said, I think you would like this. Well, I looked at it and thought maybe I would, but I'd wait until I could get the fellowship. And this was before The Return of the King was published. So I read those two, and then I said to my mother, what am I going to do if he dies before he finishes it? I didn't know. So, but the funny thing is, I have no memory of my reaction when I read the third volume finally. But a year after that, and I continued to read it, the year after that, in the middle, or towards the end of a read, I had to take The Return of the King back to the library, and somebody else had reserved it. So I was horrified, and I just had enough pocket money to go and buy my own copy.
Oh.
So I bought it at age 14, and I managed to buy the next 2 volumes over the next 2 months. I got it. Half of the cost came from my pocket money, and the other half came from my being very good at school and getting a good class list for 2 months, 3 months. And my father gave me more money if I did that. So I have my very worn and dated copies.
That was the answer to my next question. How did you discover Tolkien? So I can pose that question to Wayne now. Thank you for answering it beforehand.
You mean, how did I discover Tolkien?
Yes, please.
I had always been an avid reader, and at the time I'm thinking of, which is around 1970, in America, nearly every shop of any kind had a rack of paperback books. And I happened to see in what we would now call a home improvement store copies of the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers. Or was it? No, it was the Two Towers and the Return of the King. Of course, I realized that there was just parts 2 and 3 of 3, but I was intrigued by the covers, which were the Ballantine edition with the Barbara Remington covers, which people, Tolkien thought was crazy, and people might now think lurid, but it was very impressive at the time, and for someone who was used to looking at paperback science fiction, it was relatively tame. So I bought those on a whim and set out to find Volume 1, which I finally found in a supermarket. But in the meantime, I happened to be in a pharmacy and ran across the enchanting prelude to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, which I hadn't known existed. No doubt I would have discovered it if I'd bothered to look at the prologue before I started to read the story of The Lord of the Rings. So I bought that, as well as a book they had, Lynn Carter's Tolkien, A Look Behind the Lord of the Rings, which was one of the early books of criticism on Tolkien, or at least a book that looked at what Lynn Carter thought were Tolkien's influences, inspirations. So I bought those and read The Hobbit. Wasn't terribly impressed. I'd never read The Hobbit as a child. At this time, I was 17. And The Hobbit was okay. And then I set in on The Lord of the Rings. Unlike Brian Sibley, who got hung up on the prologue, I started in on the story immediately and was hooked. I then proceeded to read that book and The Hobbit at least once every year, and really changed my life, obviously.
That would be the next question also for Christina. Maybe was there a turning point in your scholarly life where you said, okay, this really changed, something was discovered, some letter turned up, or something happened that you said, okay, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to indulge, I don't want to just read, I want to work with this?
I think really it was Brian Sibley's radio adaptation, because I had just picked up the other books as they came out, and I continued to read them. But when I saw all these, the bookshops had displays, not quite as much as you see now, because there were far fewer books. But even so, there were several editions of The Lord of the Rings with very attractive covers. One by Pauline Baynes, actually 2 by Pauline Baynes, and Tolkien's own design on the deluxe. So I suddenly became a collector. And it had to be everything I could lay my hands on. At that point, I thought I could even get cuttings of everything that had ever appeared in the newspapers, because, of course, there wasn't that much then. The books were easier, and it was before much less had been published by Tolkien, not so much on Tolkien. But you joined the various... I joined the society hoping to be able to get some of the rarities which even the British Museum didn't have. Yeah, some of the things somebody had not been, making their deposit copies.
Wow.
I did that, and I sort of found myself among people. Found myself that there were a group of people who collected, and also, of course, I wanted American ones. Wayne wasn't the one I connected with first. Somebody suggested, I was lucky. Tom Santosky wanted. Did you hear about Tom Santosky? Yeah. Jessica Yates was already doing, and Charles Node, who were the other main sort of collecting people, already were dealing with others. So I became a sort of exchange thing with Tom, so he could get English stuff from me. But then Wayne was doing his bibliography. Was another collector, and when he came over, we were put in touch with each other. And, well, perhaps Wayne should carry on from there.
Good.
Well, we were talking about how we sort of fell into being Tolkien scholars. And for you, Christina, that was, I think, you began to write reviews for Beyond Bree of the History of Middle-earth series. And it was because of those that your name became known as someone who was on the scholarly side. For myself, it was becoming a librarian, and what do librarians do for fun? They go to libraries. They look at books, or at least I did, and I realized that there was a rather slim, if probably adequate at the time, simple bibliography of Tolkien's works and works about him. And I thought, well, I might find it fun if I were to update that, because it was a few years old. And I did that. Had very good library resources to do it with. And that was published in 1977. And I kind of pursued my bibliographic interest in Tolkien that way, and that also led me into collecting Tolkien. But it was because of my bibliographical work and Christina's reviewing, as well as her positions in the Tolkien Society, that brought us to the attention of people like Christopher Tolkien, Rainer Unwin, and eventually got us these book contracts that keep on coming.
I would explain that Christopher Tolkien wanted a book on Tolkien's art, but there was a problem. They had tried other people, but they needed somebody who knew Tolkien well, because you had to, particularly with the Silmarillion things and sketches, you had to be able to relate them to the writings. But you also needed somebody who had an art history background. I fell into both, because I did art history and medieval history at university. Mm-hmm. And as Wayne said, I had written these very detailed reviews of each issue of the History of Middle-earth for Beyond Bree. And we know Tolkien does read, Christopher Tolkien did read a lot of the things that were sent to him. So he knew that. But also because I chaired the committee that organized the 1992 conference, I sat next to him at the banquet. Well, there are sometimes perks, you know.
Yeah.
And, you made conversation. It is, it's your hostess. And we'd just seen the 1992 exhibition, which opened, and I said how lovely it would be to have a book which showed all the art and more of the art. And he explained to me about their problem. And then he already knew about Wayne's bibliography, was doing a much more detailed bibliography, because Wayne had been we had been in contact with Rainer Unwin for permissions to see things. So he suddenly made some connections, and he said, would you and Wayne be interested in doing such a book?
Wow, that's great. I mean, the books you probably are most well known for most of the people would be the companion guide or companion and guide on Tolkien. And I was wondering, it's 2 books, it's the chronology and the companion. How long did you actually take to work on that? I mean, it's a marvelous thing.
Well, let's see. When were we? Was it 2000 that we were actually commissioned to do that?
Oh. Well, when we finished the art book, we went to see HarperCollins to sort of see if there was anything else. And Rainer Unwin had advised us, your publisher needs you as much as you need the publisher. So we went with a list of things. And what we really wanted was an expanded copy of letters, expanded edition of letters. Still haven't had it. But where we were given Roverandom, which was always one of the things we'd noted because we'd had read it to deal with the artwork. But David Braun, at the publishers, said, well, they don't know, the estate doesn't want that now, but we've just publishing this volume of the Walter Hooper's book, A Companion to C.S. Lewis. Companion and Guide, is the title to C.S. Lewis. Would you like to do a Tolkien thing like this? Because this would allow you to publish more letters. So that was how we fell into that one. But it's very difficult to say how long it took us, because it took them a while before we got that. We didn't get that actual contract until about 2000, but we knew that we were going to get it. So while we were working on other things behind, and given that I could be full-time, when we realized we were getting contracts, I didn't have a job in America because I was just working. So we probably started working almost about 97, the first things. I had a lot of time and I would look things through and make notes, but the contract was until later. But I'll let Wayne.
You're kind of losing your voice. That's right. In fact, at that time, I was still working on a bibliography of Arthur Ransom, the Swallows and Amazons author. And that was finally finished and published in 2000. So then I could devote more time to the companion and guide. And we worked on that for a while, going to libraries, going to archives, looking at every scrap of Tolkien manuscript that we could find, every letter that we could turn up, and more kept turning up, and more information about Tolkien kept turning up. And eventually we had to admit to HarperCollins that although the Hooper C.S. Lewis, A Companion and Guide, was a single volume, if a thick volume on thin paper, there was no way that our book could be done in a single volume. So they said, well, 2 volumes, that will be fine. I said, well, that's very accommodating. Thank you very much. And so we proceeded we just kept gathering information, and it grew. But along the way, we knew that the 50th anniversary of The Lord of the Rings was coming up in 2004 to 5, and we had one of the projects that, as Christina mentioned, that we had suggested to HarperCollins was an annotated edition of The Lord of the Rings. Well, originally we had thought that this might be a collaborative effort among a number of scholars. But when it came down to it, HarperCollins and the Tolkien estate really just offered it to us. And in the end, it probably was a good thing, because it's like herding cats. You can't really get all your scholars together and have them on the same page all the time. But it was a two-part project. We determined that since everybody has at least one copy of The Lord of the Rings, they were not likely to go out and buy a probably 7-volume edition just to have the annotations in the normal way that an annotated edition is done. And we thought, all right, then let's do a new edition of The Lord of the Rings, because we had suggested that this would be a good opportunity for the publisher and the estate to make the corrections that we knew still had to be made. And Christopher Tolkien had identified a number of errors, as he saw them, in the Lord of the Rings volumes of the History of Middle-earth. But also to write a separate volume of annotations, which became The Lord of the Rings, The Reader's Companion, that would be keyed both to the new edition and to the old standard edition. So you get double pagination, you could find your way, as well as any other edition by book and chapter. So when the anniversary years came along, we knew we had to largely set aside the companion and guide and work on The Lord of the Rings, which was no small project in itself. The Lord of the Rings itself had to be done by 2004 because of the first anniversary. And in fact, that original volume came out without a new index. We did that for the next printing of Lord of the Rings, and then the annotated volume. And then we could get back to the companion and guide. But as Tolkien says, it's incredibly difficult when you set a project aside to pick up the threads again and to say, well, how are we doing this? What have we done? What we still need to do? And HarperCollins had wanted the companion and guide to come out originally at the time of the Jackson films, with the idea that everybody who saw the films would just be buying anything having to do with Tolkien. Well, they're less likely to buy a 2-volume reference book on Tolkien than they are something on the weapons of the Lord of the Rings or something like that. Or one of Brian Sibley's books on the making of the film, so that's okay. They realized that this was a bigger project than anybody anticipated. It always is. And then the Lord of the Rings anniversary came along, and so we were on target to finish finally in 2006. At which point Christina had a heart attack and had open heart surgery. So we had to say, we've got a really good excuse now for a little delay, but we got it up fairly quickly, doing the index rather more quickly than we thought. And unfortunately, because I also typeset the whole thing.
You yourself?
Yes.
Wow.
It was more convenient to do it that way, and I set it up. I'm a typographer and book designer as well as a librarian. And we produced a PDF, and that's what HarperCollins got, and they printed from that. But it had to be done. We didn't have any more time, so I couldn't put in running heads. So the first edition of the companion and guide is much harder to use. I mean, we were terrible trying to find our way. I was putting in the thumb indexing flags just to help navigate. So that's the long history of the companion and guide that it's not continuous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's certainly several years altogether.
Okay.
And then, of course, years later they said, well, it's out of print now, and we don't want to just reprint because we know that you've been putting out addenda and core agenda on your website. So what about doing a new edition? And we can make it 3 volumes, which we knew, of course, would mean doing an entirely new index, which is a massive job in itself. And then that took longer than we expected.
Perhaps I'll just fill in, explain something which you might be wondering. The chronology. We had originally, Walter Hooper's volume had a biography of C.S. Lewis, but Hooper had co-authored a biography of C.S. Lewis. So it was perfectly all right for him to produce a sort of reduced one in his own book. But if we had done it, we would have been just plagiarizing or summarizing Carpenter, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to do so. We felt that plenty of other people were already used Carpenter. So we decided to do a chronology. Our very first thought was to try and do what he wrote beside what he did, but that did not last very long because it was pretty obvious that one outran the other in various places.
The chronology is something that helped me through my academic work on Tolkien just so many countless times. So thank you for that, and the companion, just your tremendous work. But the chronology, I keep wondering, those are so many tiny tidbits of information on Tolkien's life, maybe even almost day by day. How did that work? I mean, did you have everything that was in the former household of Tolkien? You got grocery receipt or something?
I started it out because I was working on it before Wayne was, because he was still doing his other work. And I just, first of all, went through Carpenter, anything we had, checked magazines. But we were able to... Sorry, I think I'm going to have to give it to Wayne.
No, we used every source of information we could. Letters, of course, the published letters were very important. But we'd also, we went through every letter, as I said, every letter that we could find in a library or archive, including the complete run of the, or at least what survives, of the Tolkien Allen and Unwin correspondence at the Allen and Unwin archive, which at the time was held at HarperCollins in London. And bit by bit, you build up these things. You will read in a letter that Tolkien had just done something. He's been away, or he's going to do something. We went through all of the records we could lay our hands on at Oxford in terms of his committee assignments, his work with postgraduate students, his the meetings that he was recorded as attending, the clubs that he had joined, and their minutes, and was he at this dinner? Which? Oh, the lecture list. Yes. What was he teaching? Now this is what he was supposed to be teaching. Sometimes he might have been ill and it didn't happen, but you work with what you've got. And very early on, the Oxford University Press Archives. There's that. So a lot of different places that we could draw upon. Very early on, when we did the sample pages, we were asked by our editors at HarperCollins, is it really necessary to put down every time Tolkien attended a meeting, or did this or that at Oxford? And we pointed out that this was his life. This was the life of a scholar. We knew that the emphasis in publishing was always on what was going on with the making of Middle Earth, but that's only part of Tolkien's life, and we were doing everything. So we said, yes, we have to put this in, because for one thing, it shows that the critics who said that Tolkien was just wasting his time on writing The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or The Silmarillion didn't know what they were talking about. Here is the actual evidence that Tolkien did not shirk his duties at Oxford. He had more duties than we had ever heard of. I mean, he, as a full professor, he was at least ex officio on any number of committees. He had all sorts of responsibilities, especially during the Second World War, when a lot of the younger staff were off in the military or in war jobs. And it's an enormous, exhausting amount of information of work that Tolkien was having to do. So we were able to show that when was he doing his imaginative work? At night, didn't sleep that much, on vacations, as he said himself, during vacation time. And also he was a husband and father, so he was having to deal with his family. So there were these different aspects of Tolkien's life that we wanted to bring out and showed how they interacted, and showed that he really was honestly trying to do everything, and it wasn't that he did too little, but that he tried to do too much.
Probably one of the most burning questions: what are you currently working on? Can we expect a new publication anytime soon of Scull Hammond, as it always is named?
Well, it's Scull Hammond or Hammond Scull, depending on sort of almost whose turn it is and who's done the bulk of the work on it. Well, in terms of we're always working on something. I have a full-time job. Neither of us is getting any younger, but we're always working on something to do with Tolkien. We have no current contracts, so nothing we're obligated to do. And there are some projects that we've talked about, that we've talked with publishers about, but nothing that we can talk about in public.
Okay.
That's the way these things work, I'm afraid, is that,
sure.
They want, the publishers like to control the publicity. The estate doesn't want us to release things prematurely. So we hope that something really good will come along. I'm always asked, when is the second edition of my Tolkien Bibliography coming out? Because the first came out in 1993, which is a long time ago. And, a few publications by Tolkien have come out since then. And that was a long bibliography to begin with, and that's going to be much longer now. But I just I've had very little time to work on that over the years because we've been getting these other contracts, and I do have a demanding job. And we've also been working on a book about Pauline Baynes, which originally was going to be we had imagined it would be sort of a typical art book, a book about her life and work. And we had approached HarperCollins, 3 different departments of HarperCollins, because they published Tolkien and Lewis, who are the 2 authors for whom she's best known. Even though she was proud of that, but she was sometimes unhappy that people concentrated on that because she did so much. Well, nobody wanted a typical art book, and we understand that because it's an expensive thing to do, and not everybody buys that kind of thing. Although we thought for Pauline it would have a good sale. So we reconfigured it as a bibliography of her work, and that's over 200 different books and 100 or more contributions to periodicals, each of which represents maybe dozens of pictures. And because I have a publisher for my bibliographies, Oak Knoll Press, and they've expressed interest. So that might be a way of going about it, which would still mean that we could put in a lot of biography and history, and sort of narrative, and sort of sneak it in that way. We've been working on that since Pauline was alive, and now that her archive and library are at my library, that's been very handy. But that's something that is actually well along, and we hope that will come out before long. Other than that, of course, we contributed to Maker of Middle-earth, our essay on Tolkien as an artist. We had to write a paper for presenting at the Morgan Library in New York when the exhibition went there. And there are a couple of other things that we've been asked to do. And of course, we did the papers here.
Yeah, you already.
I think it might. Of course, one thing that helped us is the date that we started the work, because in fact, there are release dates for things like the war records, so we could look at the war records. And the same thing happened with the archive for Oxford University, which allowed us to see the meetings. We could have gone about 3 years beyond Tolkien's retirement, but if we'd wanted to go any further than that, it would still have been closed when we did the first one. We didn't do much new research for the 3rd volume, but a lot of that then gets reported online. But we have been collecting all the things over the years, so anything that had come up we put in, and we were able to piece it together.
You mentioned the letters before. I think that's really something that's burning in the fans' hearts. There are so many letters of Tolkien published, but still it isn't enough. Do you see any chance, any opportunity to have more letters published in the future?
I think eventually an expanded edition will happen. There's been some reluctance from the Tolkien estate, the family, to do that. That's fine. It's up to them. HarperCollins would be perfectly happy to I think to take this on. It would mean something else for us to do. But we've collected a lot of letters, and we know that there are at least 2, 3, 4 times the number of letters that exist that were selected for the 1981 volume.
Wow.
And the published letters, of course, concentrate, reasonably so. It was a publishing decision. They concentrate on, it's a focus on the making of Middle-earth, the writing of the Middle-earth works, which excludes a lot of the more, the deeper correspondence that Tolkien had with Ellen and Unwin. It excludes a lot of his scholarly work, and of course, family letters. So there's a wealth of material that's out there, even that we know about, let alone getting into the private family correspondence, which we hadn't we've not seen ourselves.
Okay, well,
And one of the things we feel is important is the thing that's cut out in letters, the dear so-and-so, and the ending. I mean, just from one letter that we saw, we were able to say the idea that Tolkien visited Lydney, where the what's the word?
Nodens.
Where for the Nodens site is impossible. He could not have stayed with Sir Mortimer Wheeler, because when Wheeler wrote to him to remind him he was supposed to be writing him something, it is "Dear Professor Tolkien, yours truly," and that's a very formal. If Tolkien had ever stayed with him, it would probably have been "Dear Tolkien," and yours, yours sincerely. But just that, and also the addresses would have helped us a lot in many cases. It would have helped us a lot in many cases to have had the addresses that things were written from. We were sometimes trying to deduce when exactly was he at Bournemouth, and all the movements in the First World War.
Yes.
But where you just don't know he and he. You know they were here sometimes and they were there other times, but you're just stuck.
So it's kind of a detective work on that, and always digging deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of evidence in letters that has been very useful to us. The Reader's Guide part of the Companion Guide includes many extracts from letters that were not in the published letters, and that was something that was sort of given to us as an opportunity, and you can see from that, how interesting
Yes.
these could be. Of course, we look longingly at 3 volumes of the C.S. Lewis letters, 3 thick volumes,
Yeah.
and HarperCollins published those. But you can't just publish the letters. You have to have annotations. You have to explain how, who is this and what was the relationship.
Yes. There is the upcoming Amazon TV series on Lord of the Rings, and we wanted to ask you on your opinion. It's said to be set in the Second Age, but we don't really know much about that. So what are maybe your expectations on how they're going to rule with that? What are your opinions on that?
Well, from what we've been reading online in recent days, it's still much up in the air, I gather. And they have a lot of script writers in to work on it. They're obviously going to have to make up a lot, because even working on the Second Age material that's in the appendices, although it gives you a good foundation, it's very little. And if you've got 5 seasons of a series, that's a lot of time to fill. So we really don't know what's going to happen with that. I think it's something that we're just going to have to wait and see how it shakes out. There's questions about what material the screenwriters have rights to, how much they can work with it, what they can do with it, and we really don't know anything more about that.
Yeah,
it's all speculation.
But that's a good thing. We can speculate. I mean, that's something that nobody can really say anything about that, right?
Yeah, I think it's obvious that it is not going to be a retelling of something Tolkien wrote, because Tolkien did not write that much, and so it will be filtered through the screenwriters, and it will be filtered through the directors, and at the mercy of the producers. And this is how Hollywood works.
So more of an interpretation adaptation than really adaptation from text. I wanted to ask you if you'd ever had the chance to meet Tolkien himself and talk to him.
Unfortunately not. I remember reading in the local Cleveland paper when he died. I suppose I would have had the opportunity, as Christina would have, to write him a fan letter, but I don't think either of us was ever quite that sort of child. No, we didn't meet Tolkien. However, did you meet Michael? Okay, so we've each then met. We knew Father John Tolkien, and we know Christopher, and we know Priscilla. Be seeing Priscilla in a couple of days. in Oxford. And of course, we know a number of the grandchildren. We saw Simon in New York in January. And so that's been a very great privilege. We had it was Simon and Tracy who came to our wedding reception, wasn't it? And Priscilla and Joanna Tolkien came, and Rainer was there, and Pauline Baines. She came up from Surrey, which was was a great privilege, because normally she doesn't travel. She couldn't leave the dogs. She was said. So that was very nice.
We held it in the drawing room and library of the museum where I worked in London, the Sir John Soanes Museum. So it was quite an occasion.
I imagine.
I would also think I should say that Christopher and Priscilla answered pages of questions for us when we were doing the companion and guide. I mean, sometimes it's with don't know, haven't got any answer, but sometimes there was quite a long answer that came out of it. And the one thing that we were really grateful, we wondered if they would say no. We were allowed to see the diary of Tolkien's Italian visit. And we thought, well, they wouldn't be happy if we put it in actually as it was. So we summarised it and then sort of crossed our fingers and waited to see. When we were very worried when we submitted it, because we were very worried because I had to prepare, and I can't remember whether it was 100 or 200 pages of quotations, little quotations or summaries of quotation. The estate can be quite strict to send to the Kathleen Blackburn. And we were thinking, gosh, how much are we going to have to cut out? And I did say to her that there's also probably another 50 or 60 pages of the previously unpublished quotes from the Allen and Unwin correspondence, but that's all dealing with publishing. Do you really want a whole list? She passed the lot.
The last question, also to not overdo your voices, the last question would be for both of you. If you could meet Tolkien today, or send him a letter, not a fan letter, but, to contact him, would there be something you'd like to ask him or to tell him, say to him, whatever, indulge in anything?
I don't think I would ever be able to decide, on a question to ask him, and I don't know that he would have been, happy to receive it, because he received so many. I mean, it was receiving all those questions, which led him to further invention, was a major factor in his not completing the Silmarillion during his lifetime. I think I would want to tell him how much his works have meant to me. That they literally changed my life, that they led me into reading into different areas and into buying books, into becoming interested in the organization of books, and becoming a librarian, and then into joining the Tolkien Society, and then meeting Christina and getting married. So it literally was a life-changing experience. So it would be nice for him to know that. His children know that, so that's some compensation.
I would just echo what Wayne said, exactly the same.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for taking the time, for being here, for answering all of those burning questions. But thank you foremost for the tremendous work you have done for the Tolkien community, for Tolkien scholarly research. I don't know how many people profit from your work for ages ongoing. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for keeping it up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed our interview. TolkCast is a podcast by the German Tolkien Society, and the regular episodes are in German. To get to the podcast, just follow the link in the description. Should you be interested in translating this interview into your native tongue, we're more than happy to share a transcript with you. Just contact us. You can find the address in the description. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our next Tolkienian adventure.